It is my pleasure to welcome you to Leading Change, a webinar which is drawn from Bluepoint's highly regarded workshop of the same name. Our guide today is Greg Thompson, a keynote speaker, author, and executive leadership coach with a passion for developing the greatness in individuals and organizations. As president of Bluepoint, Greg leads a talented group of professionals who design and deliver challenging educational experiences that accelerate the development of leaders. Greg is the co-author of several books, including Unleashed, The Leader as Coach. Welcome, Greg.
Thank you, Julie. And it is indeed an honor and a privilege to lead this discussion on leading change today. This is a very special time for Bluepoint. On Saturday, we're about to celebrate our 10th anniversary. Bluepoint Leadership Development is actually morphed out of and formerly the Tom Peters Company, and we come from very rich tradition and still are very grateful for our roots in the Tom Peters Company. And for the last 10 years, we've had the real privilege of serving some of the finest organizations and leaders on the planet. Today, I'm going to lead you through some thoughts on this idea of leading change. And in fact, I've entitled the discussion today, Leading Change, The Big Lie. I'd like to start out our conversation with 3 big myths about this idea of leading change. The first myth is this, is that leading change is a key competency. Now that may surprise you a bit, but it is indeed a myth. You go into any organization and ask them for their leadership competencies, and quite frankly, leading change always ends up in the top 3, 4, or 5. It is extraordinarily important for a leader to be able to lead change, but we really can't look at leading change as a competency like team leadership or project management. The reason being is that leadership and change are synonymous. You cannot be a leader unless you are involved in change. Leadership is about change. And when we take it as a discrete change, when we take change as a discrete leadership practice, we really undervalue it in many ways. The second myth, sadly, is this idea that a response to change equals a response to grief. Dr. Elisabeth KÜBLER-Ross, a wonderful woman who died about 10 years ago, she wrote this brilliant piece of work entitled On Death and Dying. This work now was a result of several conversations that she had with terminally ill patients and their families. And this wonderful book described the response, these 5 stages of response to this grief: denial, anger, bargaining, depression, and then finally acceptance. Now, I have great respect for her work, but unfortunately, the organizational theorists and leaders in development have taken this work to be and incorporated it into organizations. And quite frankly, Dr. KÜBLER-Ross had never intended it in that regard. It is intended to be a response to the news that you are terminally ill. It never was meant to be a response to organizational change, and in fact informs us very poorly about the natural response that people have to this idea of change. Dr. KÜBLER-Ross said this: people are like stained glass windows. They sparkle and shine when the sun is out, but when darkness sets in, their true beauty is revealed only if there is a light from within. Her work was not even research, and she never claimed it to be research. What she claimed was this was the analysis that she was able to create from all these conversations that she had. And her book is extraordinarily helpful to people in times of very, very bad news. The problem is that when we incorporate this into our organizations, we make the assumption that change is difficult and it is negative. Myth number 3. People naturally resist change. Now, this is prevalent in almost all of our organizations. There's this notion around that people naturally resist change, and therefore our leaders need to confront this in organizations. In fact, we use the term we need to drive change through our organizations. Nothing could be further from the truth. Throughout history, people have changed. The reason that we still exist on this planet is because we embrace change at all levels. We will sharpen a stone when we no longer can use our hands to protect our families. We'll cross dangerous oceans to escape tyranny. We'll exploit technology. Think about how we have changed our working day, our living day in this day as compared to 10, 20, 30 years ago. We'll adapt to new environments. We continually do so. Change is really part of humanity. We are continuing to look for new worlds. It's part of who we are. I believe that we're absolutely hardwired to change. And the more the neuroscientists learn about the workings of the human brain, the more that they learn that we can't stand the status quo in many ways. We're looking for change. When I was in college, I worked during the summers in a fish cannery, and I worked there to help put myself through college, and it was a pretty menial, boring task to work on the canning line. Fascinating story. Very shortly after I joined the organization I worked for, is that I observed that once in a while, someone in the canning line would put a can in upside down. Interesting. Now, why would they do that? They put the can in upside down, and the whole line shut down. But nobody knew where the can was. Nobody knew what piece of equipment went down. And so for the next, 15 or 20 minutes, people would scurry around, going from machine to machine, trying to figure out what was wrong, and they would fix it. And then the machine would start up again, the line would start up, and we would start canning again. Fascinating. What was happening in that moment was people were trying to institute change. They were trying to make a problem happen. They wanted it to be important. They wanted to solve something, and they couldn't stand the monotony of the canning line. Think about this. I wonder what's happening in our organizations today. I wonder how many of our problems in our organizations are simply caused by people who are exasperating issues so that they can become problems, so that they can create change, so that they can make the system different in some way. This is a common quote. This is a well-accepted quote by Gandhi, "Be the change." A couple of things I think are important to note. Number one, he never said that. He never wrote that. There's absolutely no evidence that he either penned that or included that in any one of his speeches. Now, it's very similar to a lot of things that he stood for. But quite frankly, it gives short shrift to our leaders today. Think about it. If all you have to do is be the change, that's a pretty simplistic answer to leading change. In other words, say you want to have a more entrepreneurial organization. Does that mean all you need to do is to become an entrepreneur yourself and the rest of the organization will change with you? What if you want to become a more coach-like organization? So you simply need to become a better coach yourself? Great idea. Nothing wrong with that. But that simply is not enough. The problem with this statement, "Be the change," is that it gives short shrift to all the hard-working men and women in organizations who really make change happen. They know that leading change is not easy. They know it requires a concerted effort. They know it requires discipline. They know it requires a deep personal commitment. It is difficult. So why is it so difficult? Why is it so difficult to make things change within an organization, to create new culture, to create new processes, to create a new thrust, a new strategy within an organization? Why is it so difficult? Well, a key to this comes out of the wonderful book called Immunity to Change, written by Robert Keegan and Lisa Leahy. Their thesis in this book, a well-researched book I might add, is that it's not that we don't want to change, it's that we have, each one of us, has some kind of competing commitment. We're committed to something else. They worked with a number of heart patients to really understand why some heart patients would not take medication that would otherwise save their lives. And it was because they were deeply committed to not being a dottery old fool who needed medication. Now, I do a paraphrase of their work, but essentially what Keegan and Leahy were saying is that it's not that we resist change. It's just that we're deeply committed to something else. So now what does this mean for us who are leaders in organizations? Well, I believe the same thing applies. It's not that we resist change per se. It's just that we are deeply committed to something else. Now, the theory of immunity to change is we have individual commitments to other things. The beauty of organizational work is this, is that in organizations there are three near universal competing commitments. Three things that almost everybody in organizations is committed to that they need to attend to before they're going to embrace any form of change. Number one, we do not want to be unimportant. Number two, we do not want to appear incompetent. And number three, we want to be free. Think about those. We do not want to be unimportant. So I, in Bluepoint, I'm committed to the importance of my work, my role. And if I'm going to change, I'm not going to change to something that's less important willingly. I mean, you may force me to do the work, but if you want me to embrace the change, I need to have another important role. Number two, we do not want to appear incompetent. Now, this one is probably the most important. It's not just the incompetence. It's the feeling that incompetence brings. The psychologists tell us today that one of our deepest fears is being humiliated. For many of us, apparently, it's a deeper fear than death. This idea of being embarrassed or being humiliated. In organizations, incompetence brings humiliation. And either consciously or subconsciously, I believe that we will go to great lengths not to appear incompetent. And thirdly, we want to be the master of our own ship. There's something about humanity, there's something about the human condition that says we want to be free. We want to be free in any society. And organizations and teams are just specialized forms of society. If I have a high degree of freedom in my job, and I'm a receptionist or I am a CEO, I am deeply committed to that freedom. And if any change does not allow me to have that freedom, then I'm not going to willingly go along with that change. So, coming to the leadership level, what can we as leaders do? If there are three competing commitments that are near universal in our organizations, what can we do to address these? Well, first of all, we need to look at this idea of driving change. Very popular today to talk about leaders driving change through their organizations. I would suggest it's unfortunate. Think about it from your perspective. How would you feel about your boss or your boss's boss driving change through you? There's something very paternalistic about this. There's something really unempowering about this idea of other people driving change through us. I believe our role is much more about facilitating the natural desire to change. So if I take the idea that I'm going to drive change through my organization, I believe I start on the wrong pathway. However, if I see my role as a leader to facilitate the natural desire to change, I believe this is a very fertile path. This is a path on which I can have other people that willingly join me. If you think about change from a core objective perspective, what would you like it to look like at the other end? Now, I recognize that change is an ongoing process, but think of some kind of discrete change event that you'd like to see happen in your team, in your organization. What would success look like at the very end of it? Now, if you look at this through the eyes of the individual, not the organization, not about some grand vision being accomplished or new product launched or new process in place or new way of serving the customers. Think about it from the individual's perspective. What would it look like to be completely successful for them? Number one, my work is now even more important. Number two, I have mastered the work. And number three, I own my work. It is all about the work. The problem is we put so much stock in creating a grand vision. We put so much stock in creating this great pot of gold at the end of the pathway that what we do is we forget that it is about the work. Are we able to provide the kind of work that people will willingly shift to and people will embrace with all their talents and with all of their energy? It's all about the work. There are really three dimensions to leading change. So for us as leaders, three things that we need to attend to, three areas that we need to really sharpen our swords. Three places we really need to put like 99.9% of our energy when leading change. Number one is creating direction, and direction that is important for people. Number two, helping people master the new processes, systems, and skills. And number three, create freedom. Freedom in the organization, freedom in the team, and freedom in the job. If we look at this idea of creating direction, accelerating mastery, and declaring freedom, this really sets our agenda as leaders. So creating direction, three areas to focus on. Number one is setting a path forward. Number two, illuminating purpose. Now, quite frankly, we do, as leaders, we do a pretty good job of most of these. We can do better. We can look at how we communicate, how we set the path forward, the clarity of direction. It is the third one that we do the poorest job on. This is crafting the new story. Now, most leaders today recognize that story is a powerful way of communicating. Really, it is through a story that we invite people to a future that is better than today. It is through story that we really communicate the change. I love this quote from Howard Gardner. A key, perhaps the key to leadership, is the effective communication of a story. Most neuroscientists would agree that in the workings of the human mind, the only way we can organize information is with a story. So the past was a story. Are we as leaders able to create a new story to replace the old story in everybody's mind? Here is where most of us fall down. We work really hard at doing that. But the place where most of us miss is this, is helping others create a new, bigger story for themselves. So think about it this way in shorthand. Our job as leaders is to create a grand story, a new story for our team, our organization, whatever it might be, and communicate that in an exciting, inspiring way. Create an epic in some way. Now, here's the problem, is that most of us stop short at that. We need to go the next step. We need to help other people find a starring role in that story. They need to see the importance of their role in that story. Secondly, is to accelerate mastery. And sadly, this is an area where we equip our leaders very poorly. We do a very poor job of helping our leaders help their people master the change. We do very little about teaching our leaders to be teachers, to teach competencies, to advise on processes, and to be mentors for others. So when you think about this idea of mastery, this is really the idea of helping individuals avoid humiliation. Now, it's helping individuals succeed in the new system, the new process, the new world, whatever that might be, gain the skills, competencies, understand the processes, incorporate this into their careers. But the one area that we really fall down on is the role of leader as teacher. How many of our leaders have ever taken any formal training at all in the idea of teaching? Most of our idea of teaching is that teaching was an intermittent thing that we would do once in a while. It no longer is the case. We do our leaders a grave disservice by not equipping them to be a continuous teacher and to help others master skills and processes and continue to master new skills and new processes. Most of us have our grounding in education by looking at classical educational models where you have a teacher and a student. These do not work in organizations. These are very ineffective in organizations. In organizations, a leader as teacher needs to be able to form an adult-to-adult partnership with others within the organization. There are 5 key practices to becoming a great leader-teacher. Today, I don't have enough time to go into them in detail, but I want to whet your appetite. I want to get you thinking about these ideas about, am I a great leader-teacher? Am I really somebody who can help others master competencies, skills, and processes in a relatively short period of time? Number 1, am I able to generate a compelling interest? Can I get people excited about a new way of being, a new skill, a new competency? Am I able to create that kind of partnership with others? The best teachers today are not professorial teachers. They are co-learners with their team members. And do we encourage deep understanding? Am I creating just a new process and teaching a new process, or am I really conveying how that new process is touching the customer, how that new process is creating organizational value or corporate value? Am I encouraging a deep understanding of the new skill, of the competency, of the process? Am I able to facilitate critical unlearning? Am I able to help people let go of things that no longer are true for them, no longer are correct, and no longer serve them well? And am I able to create almost a career-long learning pathway for individuals? Am I able to help them think about this idea of learning and mastery as a career-long process? And thirdly, the last one is probably my favorite, is the idea of declaring freedom. Now, you won't read about this in many textbooks about leadership and management. The idea, well, you have to declare freedom. I believe that freedom and accountability are closely linked and, in fact, are almost one and the same. Design autonomous jobs. Do we design jobs that are completely autonomous? They can be team members. They can have interdependencies with others. But is the final product of the change, does it allow somebody to have a job that is theirs? Are they able to perform at a high level in that? And I'm going to talk a little bit more about this in a moment, this idea of high performance coaching. And thirdly, do you insist upon accountability? And again, I'd like you to think about the strong link between accountability and freedom. When I'm fully accountable for something, there's a sense of freedom, not chains, not constraints that come with that. Think about this for yourself. What parts of your own work do you feel fully accountable for? There is a sense of freedom that does come with that. When you think about this idea of coaching and accountability and freedom, it starts with this idea that most leadership happens one conversation at a time. A lot of change that occurs really comes as a result of broad, sweeping strategic shifts and the like, lots of large group town hall meetings, lots of work with individual task forces and committees and the like. But at an individual level, most leadership happens one conversation at a time. And every one of those conversations can be a coach-like conversation. So what does that look like? What does great coaching look like? Well, I would encourage you to look at this idea of great coaching as something beyond inspiring somebody, beyond really mentoring them and beyond advising them and beyond teaching them. It really is when you're at that level and you've done all that other, and now you're at the level where you're encouraging them, you're affirming them, you're challenging them, you're constructively confronting them, you're helping them take accountability for themselves and their worlds. Can you make another person accountable? Certainly not. But a great coach can encourage it. And it starts with what we call at Bluepoint, we call it the coaching perspective. Think about this for a moment. Great coaches see others as resourceful, talented, and fully capable of making their own decisions. Do you see people in your organizations that way? Resourceful, talented, and fully capable of making their own decisions. Great coaching starts with that perspective. We're very transparent. As leaders, we're incredibly transparent. And when we have that attitude, people will know that. And this is how we start the process of influencing people to take full accountability for their work. This is probably the most difficult aspect of change leadership. And again, it's very rarely written about. It's this really idea that at some point, the only way we can provide freedom to others, the only way we can ensure full accountability to others is to let go. And this can be extraordinarily difficult. Our former CEO, Boyd Clark, who we lost about 9 years ago to lung cancer, sadly, said to me one time, he says, you know, Greg, leadership at its very core is an act of faith in others. Leadership is an act of faith in others. Now, there's many ways of describing this thing called leadership. When you think about it, though, through Boyd's definition, do we really function at that level where we have enough faith to let go of people, even when we are at risk, even when it's a sacrifice for us, even when the change is not complete, but we need to let go so that others can assume full responsibility for their work. This is the measure of the great change leader. This is the measure of the great leader as coach. I did want to share with you what we call the leading change matrix. And it really is a schema for your own development. And if you're looking at how you might want to really accelerate your development as a leader of change, I would encourage you to look at it through this window. First of all, I would encourage you to focus on these three big leadership dimensions. Direction. Am I able to create a new pathway forward, to put a story around that pathway, and to help others see a great role for themselves in that story? Because unless that is as a foundation, nobody will move willingly down the change road. Thirdly, am I able to help others master skills and processes required so that they cannot appear to be incompetent? They can appear to be extraordinarily competent in the new system, whatever the new system might be. And lastly, am I prepared to declare freedom? Am I really prepared to insist on individual accountability, autonomy, and declare freedom for the individual so that he or she can be the master of their own ship? So when you look at that, this idea of leader as communicator is important across all three of these, but is particularly important in the first one, in direction. Leader as teacher, leader as coach, and leader as architect. So leader as communicator, it's about the new story. Think about a change that you have in front of you now. Now, think about what you are communicating to others through the eyes of others. Stop for a moment. Put yourself in the shoes of one of your team members. What do you believe that team member thinks is the new story? Do they have a clear idea of what that story is, number one? And number two, do they have a starring role in that story? So secondly, look at yourself in this idea as leader as teacher. Would others attribute the qualities of great teacher to you? Are you able to help other people gain the competencies and processes that they need, and expertise in the processes they need to master the new culture, master the new strategic objectives, master the new priorities? And as a coach, think about it. When you've had a great coach, one of the outcomes of great coaching is that I am responsible for my own performance. I am responsible for my own career. I'm responsible for my own future. Are you that person? Are you that person to your team members? Are you the person to your team member who encourages them, challenges them, constructively confronts them, and probably most importantly at all, sees them as completely resourceful, capable, and able to make their own decisions, run their own world, and do their own work? This is how leaders encourage and, quite frankly, insist upon personal accountability. Now, there's one more role for us as leaders that we often neglect, and this is the idea of us leaders as designers, leader as architect. Do you see yourself as a designer? Do you see yourself as an architect of jobs, an architect of systems, an architect of processes, an architect of structure? Again, we do very little in our organizations to help equip our leaders to be excellent at this idea of architecture. Number one, are you able to create work that has great meaning? There's this idea that we should be delegating in organizations, and I would suggest that delegation is a paternalistic concept that has outlived its time. Not our job to delegate our work to others. Think about it this way. How do you like your work? How would you like it if your work was really other people's work kind of delegated down the organization or out the organization to you? Don't you want your own work? I really believe that we do a great disservice to people by delegating our work to them. I would encourage you to turn your head around another way and think about our role as leaders, as designers of big jobs. Is it not our job as leaders to design the biggest jobs possible for all our team members, the biggest jobs possible, then we get to do whatever's left over, both the really high strategic level stuff and maybe some of the grunt level work as well. But our job is singular. It's not to delegate our work. It is our job to build big, important jobs, work that has meaning for others. Secondly, are we able to design work in which people can excel at? Are we clear enough about the goalposts, about the parameters to work, that really are jobs? They're big jobs, but they're jobs that people really can have some clarity around what they need to do. What are the key success factors? What are the things they really need to focus on? And how can they excel at those things? And lastly, are we able to design jobs in which people say, I'm the captain of my own ship? Whether or not I'm the receptionist or the CEO, I own my work. I have autonomy. I make decisions. It's up to me to make this job function. This is when I own my work. There is one harsh reality, and I want to close the webinar today on this one idea. Think about this idea of resistance to change. We use the term very frequently in organizations. Interesting. Here's one way you can tell that it really is a myth. Next time you hear some leaders or HR folks sitting around a table talking about the inevitable resistance that people have to change, next time you hear that, ask them this question. Do you naturally resist change? I will tell you what the response is. No, not we. We don't resist change. We treat it as an adventure. We love the mystery of it. We want the novelty. We want to achieve new, great things. We love to learn. Think about the arrogance of that response. We embrace change. We love change, but it's everybody else that resists change. It's really hard to find somebody in a senior leadership role that will admit to resisting change automatically, naturally. It is, I believe, an excuse that we use not to do the hard work that we really need to do to help people facilitate their natural desire to change. Our job, I believe, is straightforward. It is clear. It is also difficult. Our job is to create new work that others believe is meaningful, that they can master, and over which they have clear sovereignty. We need to remember that people in our organizations are irreversibly committed to being an important cog in the machine. They want to be important, appearing uniquely competent, and being the captain of their own ship. And the harsh reality for this, the harsh reality is this, is that every time we use that term about our team's resistance to change, it is a direct reflection of the quality of our leadership. Every time, if I look out into Bluepoint Leadership Development, an outstanding organization, if I talk about it or one of our teams' resistance to change, I'm pointing a finger directly at myself. What that says is that I have not facilitated the organization's natural desire to become better, to make a shift onto a new positive pathway going forward. I want to leave you with one slide, and this is we are a coaching leadership development organization. At the very core, we're about change. Bluepoint is about facilitating the change in leaders, helping leaders shift onto a new high-performance pathway going forward. And so as coaches and as facilitators and as researchers in this area of leadership, we're always looking at, okay, what is next? And therefore, I love this quote from Maria Robinson. Nobody can go back. Nobody can go back and start a new beginning, but anyone can start today and make a new ending. Every time I start a new coaching assignment with a client, I either use this quote or the theme from this quote to be thinking about it. What can we do today as leaders and as leaders of change to make a shift so that 6 months from now, we're not looking back and having regrets about how we have intervened, how we have led our teams, how we have helped people make that move to a place where they have important work, to a place where they can master the work, to a place where they have freedom. On that, I'd like to turn it over to Julie Henry again. On the screen now, I have put up my email address. I welcome any comments and questions, any thoughts and insights that you might have on this idea of leading change. I'd like to thank you for listening to our webinar and participating in our webinar today. If there's anything we can ever do or I can do personally to serve you, please contact us. Julie.
Thank you, Greg. Thank you, everyone, for joining us today. We are glad that you could be with us today. We also think that you may be interested in Greg's article on leading change, which you can actually download from the resources section on Bluepoint's website at bluepointleadership.com. We will also include a link to this article and to the recording of this webinar in a follow-up email that you'll receive in the next few days. We also want to take this opportunity to remind you that this webinar is actually drawn from Bluepoint's Leading Change Workshop, which is available in 2-day, 1-day, and 90-minute formats, and provides an intense study on how leaders can accelerate and sustain planned change. Participants really gain a deeper appreciation for the change process and the leader's critical role in making the process an ultimately positive experience for both themselves and the members of their team. If you'd like more information about leading change or any of Bluepoint's workshops, I would be more than happy to connect with you. Please feel free to reach out to me via email at juliehenry@bluepointleadership.com. Thank you very much again for joining us, and we hope that you enjoy the rest of your day.